Part 2. A Glow in the Distance. I wasn't there when AT&T started working on what we now call modulator demodulators, when they started the process of coming up with a way to send data across phone lines, as long as the line was dedicated and the machines, which were very expensive, sat on either side. I wasn't there when data transmission across all sorts of lines was being developed, refined, and utilized for business and news gathering and technology in general. I was only 7 when Ward Christensen and Randy Seuss got together and started working on what ultimately became the bulletin board system. The dial-up bulletin board system, naming itself after an actual bulletin board you might find at a user group. I had the privilege of meeting both of them decades later. I wasn't there for any of the innovations that were leading very quickly to modems being installed at homes, to home computers that could drive those modems. All I knew in the background was that moment that I started using bulletin board systems and the way that they absolutely took over whole aspects of my life for the rest of my life. It was only after the end, when I stopped calling them with any regularity in the middle of the 1990s, that I even thought of it as an era, as a revolution of what it was in the general sense. I didn't think of it as anything else but a dream. But when the next revolution happened, I started seeing patterns emerge. I came into what we ended up calling the Internet with a whole different attitude. Less of wonder, but expectation. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Daniel Boyd, Jeff Atwood, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. I was ready for the Internet. I had been trained in the world of bulletin board systems for years before I even understood that something called the Internet was out there. In the same way that I had missed out on all these early historical works, the arguments, the conferences, the standards discussions, all of that had happened. I was not even a teenager when Ethernet and Token Ring and other formats were fighting it out for dominance. I was barely in my teens, while different companies started to expand all of their connections and businesses and labs and colleges began to be nodes on some sort of virtualized ideal of a network that they would call the Internet. In college, however, I started to become aware something else was happening besides bulletin board systems. The way that I personally fell into the Internet was by calling into an MIT dial-up line called Terminus. You would call this number, and if one of the 8 lines was free, you were given a prompt, and from that prompt, you could type in a machine name, go to that machine, and if you had an account, log in, and then from there, be on the Internet. I don't recall how I got that number. I don't have any memory of exactly how I found out this all was going to be something, because at the time, it just felt like another bulletin board system, albeit one with many more hoops to jump through, and a prompt for an operating system I had never seen the likes of. From my little computer at college, I could call into Terminus. I could then connect to the GNU machine, log in using the RMS account, whose password was RMS, and then connect to the world. It all had the feeling of echoes, of patterns, of being something I'd done before, except where before I had used phone numbers and there were system operators, Now I was connecting through something more strange, machines that seemed to have no operator, online bulletin boards that had hundreds of simultaneous users, or which offered me many hundreds of megabytes of files I could download. A sense, really, of infinite time. Instead of being on a bulletin board for 10, 20, or 30 minutes and being nudged towards the door so the next person could come in, the internet, as I was experiencing it, was losing all of that. There was a sense of all you could eat. If you could connect in and you could stay on and things didn't time out or break or otherwise fail you, you could be on there forever. Downloading, leaving messages, talking with people around the country or even the world through a variety of systems. Usenet felt like a bulletin board, just with much, much larger messages written with that luxury of time. I didn't understand until later that these people were in dedicated computer rooms working at terminals, or they were connected at businesses that had given them the ability to post at their leisure from their offices. None of that mattered to me. It just felt like what I had seen before, but bigger. So much bigger. Where previously bulletin boards to me were these little virtual places, these small, almost gas stations on long and distant and dark highways that I stopped off at for less than a half an hour. These new bulletin board and Usenet hybrids felt like satellites that you were connecting to from a long distance, and everybody there had nowhere they needed to go. It was in this environment I learned about multi-user dungeons, MUDs, and later mushes, where people could connect and chat and build characters and move around in text-based virtual spaces that felt almost real, felt like they could react to what you were thinking. And since half the things there were real people from all over the area, or maybe the world, it was, in many ways, totally real. As I started to understand the internet more and more, I started to feel like I could play a part in it, that I could build some sort of world, and with my friend John Resigno, we co-founded Tiny Tim, a parody that became a real thing of MUDs, a world full of jokes about other places, but also in its own way, a special place itself. I took on personas, he took on personas, we brought more people in, more people enjoyed what we were doing, and so began a journey that hasn't ended, with Tiny Tim heading towards 35 years of existence. It could survive because it was simple, but over the years it became manageable, a simple, small program running in memory, barely taking up megabytes in a world now where gigabytes of memory comes at the local store. But that text-based internet, that place of Gopher and Telnet and UNIX commands becoming the lingua franca by which I could get things done, that was the real world. This shadow world of living, of taking classes and going to events and attending concerts and movies and hanging out with people. That was nice. But that idea, the internet, the wonder of it, was blowing me away every day. It's hard to walk away from something that's always on, always happening, always beckoning you. And over time, I saw lots of people fall prey to it, fall on their faces academically, fall apart in their personal lives because the virtual seemed so much more alluring, so perfect, such a strong position to live a life. Bulletin boards fell by the wayside pretty quickly. There were a few who tried to grow with the times, mostly becoming the front end to the internet. But over time, these super BBSs became nothing more than on-ramps to get onto the internet, a monthly fee to give you a dedicated phone line that you could call into and connect to what we were calling the net. In that era, which for me was very short, 1988 through about 1992, I was finding myself utterly absorbed in how the internet could be everywhere and nowhere. There were no smartphones, so it wasn't in my pocket, but it was at my home. It was at computer centers I could sneak into. It was at friends' homes, and it was always waiting for me, always willing to immediately pick up where I last left it. I wasn't waiting for it. It was waiting for me. Meanwhile, out in the world, the revolution was being described with the same breathless concerns of apocalypse and mystery and what it meant. In press, in pop culture, computer networks were portrayed as dangerous, as virtual nightmares that would crush and destroy lives. I saw all of the same language, the breathless hope that the internet would span the earth and would provide access to a world of information, but at the same time cause nothing but damage, destruction, and decay. When I first joined, the internet was totally non-commercial, completely run by governments and businesses with no profit available, with no commercial aspect available, no ads, no selling of things except for in very limited quantities and in very small sections. It was, to some, a paradise that we didn't know we lived in. You could assume that the people you saw were people. When folks were troublemakers or miscreants, I've said that they're more like Batman supervillains than straight-up street thug shooters. They were people who were playing funny games because it was hilarious, because they could make funny things happen and describe them oddly. It was, to me, very special. Because of my bulletin board years, I recognized it was finite, that it was going to change, that there was no way that this expensive network was going to stay untouched, unchanged, that when I would telnet to new machines or FTP to transfer files or post on Usenet, I was doing so on borrowed time. I didn't have a crystal ball. I just knew. This is a moment, slipping through time, slipping through my hands, and I basked in its glow, and I loved it as I had loved all times before me and all technology that had passed in my life. It was an internet that is utterly, completely gone. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, thanks to James Bekoyanu, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Martin, Symbionts, Benjamin Guts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere, who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. And that is part 2.